everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the virtual programming of the Lawrence Family JCC, Jacobs Family Campus. This evening's event, The Great Jewish American Female Directors, the Second Generation Master Genre Films, is a product of the JLearn Arts and Ideas and the San Diego International Jewish Film Festival departments at the San Diego Center for Jewish Culture. This is the second lecture of the three-part lecture series on the Great Jewish American Female Directors with Dr. Lawrence Barron. We are so excited to be welcoming him back tonight. I am Lauren Lidke, the coordinator for the JLearn department here at the J, and we of course hope you find yourselves healthy and in good spirits as you join us today. We are now a solid 3 months into virtual programming, which is just so exciting, and we want to ensure all of you that as long as we're confined to our homes, doing our part to flatten the curve, we will be here to bring you meaningful and engaging cultural and educational programs. So as we're acclimating to Zoom, just wanted to go over a few pieces of Zoom protocol. Everyone is muted as we begin. If you do have your video on, and it's wonderful to see all your beautiful faces, please do remember that we can all see you. So please just keep that in mind. And then if you do have any questions, there will be a question and answer piece at the end of the lecture. We can do that a couple different ways. You can either include your comments in the chat function, which will go directly to me, and I will then relay them to Dr. Barron. That's available at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and it says chat. Or you can also use the raise hand feature, which is when you click on the participants button, it will show you a little blue hand symbol over on the right side of your screen, which then if you click it, you can raise your hand, which will alert me that you have a question or comment. I can unmute you and you can say your comment or ask your question to Dr. Barron directly. Another piece, I would like to thank all of the underwriters of the 2019-2020 JLearn and Arts and Ideas seasons. It's truly through their generosity that we are able to present events like today's, and that is whether at our JCC or here virtually. So please be sure to visit our virtual LFJCC page to see more of the exciting programming we have coming up at the San Diego Center for Jewish Culture and the JCC. And again, that's our lfjcc.org/virtual page. So this evening, Dr. Lori Barron, who is the Professor Emeritus and former Chair of Modern Jewish History at San Diego State University, is presenting an incredible lecture on the second generation of female film directors, the second wave. So I'm excited to welcome Dr. Barron here with us. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, again, thank you, Lauren and Ryan, who's running things technically for us tonight, and the Center for Jewish Culture for inviting me to have a chance to speak. It's hard to believe it's 3 months. Can you believe that? Since you're all muted, if you want to scream right now, you're welcome to do that. I can't take it anymore. We can all do that. And what I want to do today is, I'm a professor, and this is a 3-part series, so I need to do a little review of the last lecture, and there'll be a pop quiz on it as well afterwards. So last time I talked about the pioneering Jewish women directors. There had been only 2 women directors working in Hollywood between 1930 and 1960, and the reasons for that I'm not going to go into, but things started to change in the 1960s. Partly because the studio system, which was really based on the old boy network and hiring other people who were friends or colleagues or whatever, which discriminated against women, started to collapse. Movies started to try to attract the new audiences that the 60s generated, the youth audiences and more progressive women, Black audiences, and so they were looking for different kinds of directors during that time. The studios were also looking to compete with television, which had taken away a lot of their audiences in the 1950s, to do something different that you couldn't do on TV, and with foreign films as well. And finally, there was this convergence of the cultural and political revolutions of the 60s, which spun off the women's revolution, the women's movement, now for example, it started in 1960. It spun off the civil rights legislation of 1964 and 65, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, both of which called, as we learned yesterday, that there should be no discrimination on the basis of sex, though initially it was seen more in terms of race. But women in Hollywood picked up on that and started organizing around that and putting pressure on the industry from within. Women's topics became more important as the feminist movement became more important, and Jewish topics became more important as the identity politics movement, which was a reaction really to the Black Power movement, or a complement, however you want to see it, began to spin off as well. And so in the 1970s, you have studios at least trying to make movies that would appeal to more progressive women, changing how women are portrayed, and trying to recruit women. They didn't do a particularly good job. Often they had women's movies made by men, but they were able to attract and recruit 17 women directors, which is a lot better than 3. And 8 of those 17 were Jewish, and that's what got me interested in this topic. Partly shouldn't surprise me. There's a lot of Jewish people in Hollywood and in the industry, but that percentage was so high was not only shocking, but when you looked at the movies, for at least 6 of these women, the movies not only were feminist, they were Jewish, and in content or with characters. And I thought that was an interesting phenomena. But if you look at where these women came from, most of them were women who already had strong reputations as entertainers, as writers, as screenwriters. They didn't come out of film schools. They were older, often in their 40s and 50s when they started making films. And they were famous people. Barbara Streisand, the people I talked about last time, Barbara Streisand, Elaine May, are 2 of them, Lee Grant, who started making films in the 1980. And so you have, and that was a deliberate strategy, by the way, by the American film industry, which founded a workshop for women directors and basically recruited famous women because they thought they'd be more likely to get contracts. They had the contacts, they had the clout, and if you look at the women, people like Maya Angelou, these were people who were recruited. Lee Grant was one of them, and so women entered in that way. There were a couple of women, that's Joan Micklin Silver and Claudia Weil, who came out of the New York film scene, making documentaries and independent films and educational films. And because they got good buzz on their first feature films at foreign film festivals, they got picked up by studios that were looking for talented women directors. And that's how Claudia Weil, who made Girlfriends, and Joan Micklin Silver, who made Hester Street, entered in. So that's where it's set up. The women I'm going to talk about today are very different. These are women, many of them went through the film directors workshop that I just talked about, but they were less famous. They took less famous people as they went along. There was, for the first time, the Directors Guild Association. The women in there formed a women's caucus and sued a number of studios for discrimination. Starting in the suit was 1982, but the formation of the women's group was 1979. And they lost that lawsuit, but only because people said the Directors Guild was actually part of the discrimination. A lot of the rules that they had set up on how directors get positions had sexist discrimination kind of built into them. These were agreements negotiated in the 1930s. And so they were able to overcome, beginning to overcome that. Part of it is more opportunities to make films. We often think that film festivals are a natural thing, and there have been film festivals for a long time. But just to give you some perspective on this, 1978, first year of the Sundance Film Festival. 1980, the first Jewish Film Festival, San Francisco Film Festival, which, by the way, premiered Lee Grant's movie, Tell Me a Riddle. Another important factor is women start to take executive positions at studios. Sherry Lansing becomes the first president of a studio in 1980, and there's several other women who become studio presidents in the 1980s and 1990s, and that helps. And the increase of women in film schools, seeing directing as a possibility, and now that there's the beginning to be more of a merit-based rather than old boy network system, they have a greater chance of getting in and being recognized. And the studios were interested in a certain kind of tokenism, that they wanted to show that they were making what they called good faith efforts to hire women. So I want to look at this set of women who are very different than the first set of women. I call them masters of the mainstream. And they are masters of the mainstream because, unlike the women I looked at before, they don't look for movies that are edgy, that might have a limited audience. They look for they go with the traditional genres, and they become masters of those genres. And they do much less with the Jewish element. They're very interested in box office. They understand in fact, Elaine May almost killed off women directors by having a number of flops after her first great success with The Heartbreak Kid and A New Leaf. There was a worry that if you were a woman director and you got a studio contract and then you flopped, it would hurt other women. So they're interested in making mainstream films. They're very cautious, and part of this caution is they don't want to make films that are too Jewish. They want to mute that. There's a sense that if you make a film that's Jewish, it limits your audience, that it won't be brought outside of certain markets. And so there are what we call, so there's Jewish characters in their movies, and there's what we call Jewish moments, but it's never central to the movie. I want to read you a quote from Susan Seidelman, who's one of the first ones. She says, in all these films, being Jewish has nothing to do with the plot, nor does it make the characters any less relatable to non-Jewish audiences. Their religion and ethnicity add flavor to the characters, but do not define them. And by the way, I think they were wrong in this, because if you look at a number of the hits of the 1980s, Jewish movie, Private Benjamin, which you're going to see one of the directors I'm talking about was the screenwriter for, Yentl, Crossing Delancey, Dirty Dancing, Biloxi Blues, Sophie's Choice. There are a whole bunch of movies that are very much grounded in Jewish life in the 1980s, The Chosen, but these people chose not to make those movies. The first person, and by the way, since they do what we call coding of Jewish characters, you might recognize a character as being Jewish even though they're not named as Jewish. You might do it by their names, you might do it by their looks, you might do it by the way they talk, the inflections of their voice, or by the places they visit. But there's no other mention of their Jewishness. And this is a strategy, and Nathan Abrams has written a great book called The New Jew in Cinema, says that this is a strategy also of Jews being more comfortable in the United States. And they feel you don't have to draw attention to the Jewishness. It's just part of the characters. It doesn't have to be a separate issue. They're just American characters who might be Jewish. The first person who does this, so what I'm trying to do today is, if I'm going to show the Jewish element of these directors, I'm kind of making lemonade out of limes. I really have to strain a little for some of these people. And this is the first time I've given the lecture, so I'm interested in seeing what you say about my interpretations. Amy Heckerling, if people could raise their hands, I want to get a sense of whether these names are known, because these are the most commercially successful Jewish women directors, with the exception of Barbra Streisand. Amy Heckerling, anybody know who Amy Heckerling is? You'll know when I talk about her movies, but she's not a household name. Amy Heckerling was born to a Jewish family in the Bronx. She did not have a bat mitzvah, her brothers did, but her strong memory, and it comes out in a lot of her interviews, people say, why do you go to comedy? She becomes a master of comedies, particularly teenage comedies. And she says, why do you go to comedy so much? And she said, because where I grew up, there were a lot of Holocaust survivors. She says, my parents' friends were Holocaust survivors, many of the people in the stores, and she says, I wanted to escape the darkness. I wanted to bring something lighter to my film. So there's kind of a strange connection. She is a film school person going from NYU and then into the MA program run by the American Film Institute. And she makes her success by making coming of age and teenage films. And she starts with a film that could have been handled very differently. This is the time. Think of who's making films during this time. Teenage films in particular, John Hughes. Usually male-oriented. He makes some female-oriented ones, but usually male-oriented films, sex, drugs, rock and roll, defiance of authority, and the male characters are usually predominant. She makes a film which could have gone that direction. It was based on Cameron Crowe's nonfiction book of sitting in at a high school in San Diego. This could be a Jeopardy question. Anybody know what? It's Claremont High School. He sat in a year as a young journalist studying students and what their lives were like, and then writing this nonfiction book. And he since has gone on to become a very famous director, screenwriter, and producer. And so it was his first film as well. And she gets this script, which could easily have been a male script. And what she does is feminize it. And so one of the main characters becomes Stacy, played by Phoebe Cates. And one of the things that's also very distinctive of her movies is her ability at casting. She has in this first movie a bunch of young actors you may have heard of. Sean Penn in one, I think it was his second role. Phoebe Cates, Judge Reinhold, just one after another after another. And she focuses on the Phoebe Cates character, whose name is Stacy, and she's feeling peer pressure to lose her virginity. And she's not really sure about it, but all her friends say she should do it, and her friends act like they know everything about it. And so finally, when she has sex, it's with an older man. It's a terrible experience. She meets a very nice guy who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but he seems to be sexually inexperienced and very nervous about having any physical contact. And so she ends up with his best friend, who's a sleazy guy named Mike Damone. Mike gets her pregnant. And one of the things that Heckerling stresses is that your first sexual experiences are usually painful and humiliating. And the movie really reflects what that's like for a woman, for a teenage girl to experience. And she gets pregnant, she has to have an abortion. Mike Damone is supposed to pay for it and go with her when she has it. He doesn't do either of these things. And then this young man decides to defend her and against Mike and condemn Mike for what he did, but also to befriend her. He becomes her boyfriend. They haven't had sex by the end of the movie. They're going slow. And his name is Mark Ratner. Mark Ratner is coded as Jewish. It's never said, name Ratner. I'm going to show you a scene. It's a scene where he first asked her out for a date. But if you look at all the other scenes in the movie where girls are asked out for dates, there's all this kind of teenage bravado and games being played. This guy is very shy. And it's kind of a stereotype, an old stereotype of the Jewish male as gentler, as kinder. I'm not sure whether that stereotype ever existed or whether it still exists. But this character is this very positive Jewish type. So.
And just with all of our programs where we do show any clips, I just always like to mention that sometimes there's a little bit of a delay on the audio. So please just be mindful of that and be patient with that fact, but everything should still come through okay. So.
Hi, did I know you from biology class?
Yeah.
What can I do for you?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I was curious. What do you do with the jackets that people leave here?
You keep them
Keep them?
in case you come back. You can look through it if you want.
No, that's cool. It would take too long to look through all that stuff. I'll pick up a new one.
What was your other question?
Oh, my other question is, can I have your phone number so I can ask you out sometime?
Do you have a pen? This one's out of ink.
Yeah. Stacy. Nice to meet you, Stacy. My name is Mark Ratner. I gotta go.
So you can get a sense, here's one of the few Jewish characters in the movie. He's very positively portrayed. Again, it's nothing central in the movie, but it's just one of these Jewish moments. Her next movie was the movie Look Who's Talking. It was the most successful movie she ever made, a mega hit with Kirstie Alley and John Travolta. Again, she had this thing for casting. She always sort of picked perfect people. And I'm sure most of you have seen Look Who's Talking. It's about a woman who gets pregnant from her boss, who says he's going to divorce his wife and of course doesn't. By the way, that man, not that all Jewish males are positive, is probably Jewish, played by George Segal. She then decides to be a single mother and find a husband and a father for her baby. And in the meantime, she meets this cab driver who helps bring packages in and who becomes the babysitter for her baby, who talks. And he uses the voice of, it's Bruce Willis's voice. And that's the comic element of it. Movie was very successful, and most people would say nothing Jewish about this movie, except Kirstie Alley's name is Molly. I had an Aunt Molly. Doesn't have to be, could be Irish. Her mother is Rosie, played by Olympia Dukakis, and her mother is a stereotype of a Jewish mother. And so let me read you a scene from this, from Look Who's Talking. I'm having trouble. I have to keep the lights down so I can't read things from a distance. She said, Molly tries to placate Rosie by claiming that her baby was fathered with frozen sperm from a medical student from Columbia. And then she tells her, she says, Mom, his parents live on Long Island. His father's in piece goods. His mother works for a cosmetics firm. She can get you a great discount. So I think that that's kind of a hint of the Jewishness. Again, not a lot. And her third movie was the great teenage movie, probably one of the best ever made, Clueless. Every studio passed on Clueless. It was a remake, a kind of modern version of Emma. What she does with this is, in fact, one of the reasons it got made, Fox, 20th Century Fox had passed on it. It came to Paramount, and at that time, Sherry Lansing had become the CEO at Paramount, and she's the one who insisted on being made. She says, I have no knowledge of why Fox dropped it, but I love female-oriented movies. For me, it seems silly now when you see what's happened in the marketplace that anyone would have missed this opportunity. But here you have Jane Austen's Emma, this remake, and it's set at Beverly Hills High School, and it's about Cher Horowitz. Now, Cher Horowitz, for those of you who, we're losing people here. The screen has disappeared. Good. Cher Horowitz is, everyone has thought that Cher Horowitz is Jewish. Her father is played by Dan Hedaya, who is Jewish. Horowitz, what could you do with that name? But she says it wasn't. It was just an idea by one of the actors, Wallace Shawn, that it was a funny name. And it's about this very entitled, wealthy, pampered girl who's very into style, very superficial, seems to be an airhead, and seems to care about nothing except how other people view her from the onset. Played by Alicia Silverstone, who was Jewish. She is a character who, there's this stereotype being set up. We might think she's the Jewish American princess, except that's not what Heckerling intended. She wanted her to be, she was the child of movie stars going to Beverly Hills High School. That's how she envisaged this. But if you look at the movie carefully, what happens is she kind of diffuses this image. If you think a Jewish American princess would be just like Cher, and by the way, she's called Cher because she's named after the singer Cher, who was her mother's favorite singer, but her mother died of Here's another question for Jeopardy. Liposuction, a liposuction going bad. Cher's this character who you think is, the typical Jewish girl until you realize her best friend is black. Her name is Dion, and the only Yiddish words uttered in the movie are uttered by Dion, who quells. She says, I'm quelling because they help a young girl named Ty, who's socially awkward, get a makeover and become cool. And in any case, I want to show you an early scene. I'm trying to make sure. What does it say on that clip there? What's the next clip?
This is the debate.
This is a famous scene because this is how she sets her up as a dunderhead, but then the rest of the movie kind of deconstructs this.
People be allowed refuge in America. Amber will take the con position. Cher will be pro. Cher, 2 minutes.
So, okay, like right now, for example, the Haitians need to come to America. But some people are all, what about the strain on our resources? But it's like when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? I said RSVP because it was a sit-down dinner. But people came that did not RSVP. So I was totally bugging. I had to haul ass to the kitchen, redistribute the food, squish in extra place settings. But by the end of the day, it was the more the merrier. And so if the government could just get to the kitchen, rearrange some things, we could certainly party with the Haitians. And in conclusion, may I please remind you that it does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty.
Amber, reply.
Mr. Hall, how can I answer that? The topic is Haiti, and she's talking about some little party. Hello, it was his 50th birthday. Whatever. If she doesn't do the assignment, I can't do mine.
It's a great scene. There recently was an article in the foreword about why Clueless is a very Jewish movie. And they said that Cher should be the head of HIAS because of her concern for refugees coming into the United States based on that scene. But what happens is, it turns out Cher is really a very other-directed person. She's like the character Emma. She tries to fix up 2 of her teachers who are single and seem to be unhappy, and also give her bad grades. To make them happy, she gets involved in projects that are philanthropic in her own way. There's supposedly a disaster which has killed and displaced people at Pismo Beach. They never describe what it is, but she decides she's going to raise money so that she can buy them water skis and caviar so they can recover from the disaster. But in the process, she helps this young girl, Ty, who's an outsider, become an insider. And she's a tough young woman. She fends off the boys. She's not someone who's just interested in having sex to have sex. She makes that clear very early on when her friends realize she's a virgin, and she says, no, I'm hymenly challenged, but I'm not a virgin. And then she later becomes interested in her brother and in her stepbrother, who wants her to have more focus, who criticizes her for saying she has no direction but going to the mall. And by the end, she's become a much more decent person. The stereotype has kind of been destroyed. And she also this movie created a whole lingo, whatever, is the famous line of, this made whatever popular, but lots of her sayings became part of commonplace. And this was a movie that not only appealed to teenagers, but it appealed to adults. It really was a major hit, a critical hit, as well as a commercial one. After that, her films she's had less of a career in movies. She's made a few movies, but most of her films after that have been films that have been for TV. And she got involved in little things. Give you an example. working for television. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but a lot of these women directors start off, they have a couple of hits, they have children. They don't want to work as hard at putting, raising the funding for a movie, doing casting, doing all these things, editing the final cut. So they go on to television, which once had been kind of looked down upon in the movie industry as really inferior to movies. But by the 1980s and 2000, it's becoming much more prestigious as HBO and a lot of the cable channels start entering into making movies and high quality series. And then eventually, more recently, as streaming channels come into being. And there's a lot more opportunity there. And women are hired at a much higher level, close to 30%, as opposed to under 20% for feature films. And so she goes into that and she gets involved in some programs you might know. She made the pilot to a little known series, Sex and the City, and made a couple of other parts of that. She currently works on a series called Red Oaks. I don't know how many of you know Red Oaks, but it's set in a Jewish country club. A guy at a summer job. She directed one of the episodes, which is about a bris. So she's come back to that. And she's made a number of other movies since then as well. So let me go to the next person, which is Susan Seidelman. Susan Seidelman, how many people know Susan Seidelman? No one. One person. Susan Seidelman was someone who wasn't raised with much of a Jewish background, from Philadelphia. She says her parents were much more culturally Jewish than they were religious. She had film training, went to NYU, and then made a small independent film for $80,000 called Smithereens in 1982. Smithereens is about this kind of shameless, self-promoting punk girl who's kind of plain, but who basically puts up posters of pictures of herself that she takes out of Xerox. She puts her face on the Xerox and says, "Who is this girl?" all over the Lower East Side to try to generate buzz, constantly grifting, in and out of relationships. She's not a particularly positive character, but the movie really captures kind of the punk lifestyle on the Lower East Side of the 1980s, when things were pretty grungy. And it became a critical hit. She was the darling at the Cannes Film Festival. Her film was the first American film, independent film, to be nominated for the highest prize at the Cannes Film Festival, the Golden Palm. And she, from that, she was able to parlay that into a studio contract to make a much more mainstream and domesticated version of the same film, which was Desperately Seeking Susan. Desperately Seeking Susan, if you know it, is about a very bored, dissatisfied New Jersey housewife who lives vicariously through ads that appear in the newspapers from a man seeking to connect with a free spirit named Susan. And she finally figures out that Susan's going to be in a certain place meeting him. She goes down there. She hits her head, sort of running away. She doesn't want to be discovered. After she's bought, Susan has pawned a jacket, and she bought the jacket. And she loses her memory. She doesn't know who she is. But because she's wearing Susan's jacket, there are criminals looking for Susan because Susan witnessed a murder. And they start chasing after her, and she doesn't know why. And then Susan appears, and who is Susan but Madonna? But it's Madonna before Madonna was really famous. Again, there's a great sense of casting in this movie and great use of color to capture Madonna's flair for fashion during this period. And so Patricia Arquette, who plays, trying to remember her name right now, the housewife, is someone who, once we find out about her marriage, we realize she's a Jewish character. And this is quite deliberate, and I want to give you a sense of this character, because her name, it's, by the way, Roseanne Arquette, not Patricia. So let me tell you a little bit about this movie, why it's feminist. because it's about this very dissatisfied woman who's really restrained within her marriage. And she's married to the guy who calls himself the Spa King. They're clearly Jewish suburbanites living in Fort Lee. Seidelman says this was the environment she grew up in. She grew up outside of Philadelphia, but she knows these people. And the marriage, there's an early scene in which she's sort of contemplating things and thinking, and her husband goes out of the room and he turns off the lights. He's totally unaware that she's there. And there's a number of other scenes like that. And so the movie takes on this thing of this woman breaking out of this shell, living a vicarious life, and eventually meeting up with Susan, and they're the ones who capture the murderers and are celebrated at the end. And it's clear she's leaving her marriage, and Susan's going to continue living her life as is. But let me show you a scene. This is actually not a scene. This is some people say, well, why is this a feminist film? And I found this thing, I'm outsourcing that explanation because I found this wonderful explanation of why this is a feminist film. And so I'm turning it over to another film person.
What makes Desperately Seeking Susan a feminist film? The film is a great example of a top-to-bottom feminist vision, produced, written, directed by, and starring women. It was a vehicle for Madonna, although none of the crew realized how massively popular she would become by the end of production. It is now a kind of period piece. It's impossible to separate the film from the New York City of the 1980s with its popular music, graffiti, locations, and costumes. The director, Susan Seidelman, crafted a film about a woman longing for the freedom she attributes to a more reckless, uninhibited character. The choice to become the person you want to be is the feminist ideal at the heart of Seidelman's film. Roberta is the frustrated character who drowns her sorrows in cake, which is the hallmark of self-pity. When she finally decides to take action and become more like her ideal, her disappearance in the bathwater reflects the upcoming journey into her own subconscious. Roberta also looks at her reflection in the Help Wanted window, then takes another proactive step in determining her own destiny. Even though Madonna was not yet a superstar, Seidelman certainly directs her with a lot of mystique. Nearly every scene introduces Madonna's character in some kind of sly reveal. She doesn't just appear in each scene, she makes a grand entrance. Susan, as played by Madonna, commands the space wherever she goes. Roberta is apologetic.
I'm sorry. I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about what happened.
But Susan makes no apologies for her behavior. Madonna has described her character in the film as irresponsible, which is how Susan must seem to the primarily male members of the outside world. But does Susan's free-spirited nature reflect a rejection of accountability, or something much rarer, a singular responsibility for herself and her own actions in the world? Susan lives the way she wants to live, but she's always in control of herself and her effect on others. She knows what she's doing, she just lives a particular way. Seidelman's camera looks up Madonna in the first part of the film, then looks up Roberta after she has undergone the persona swap. This important reveal is seen through the eyes of Aidan Quinn, so is in effect a subversive version of Laura Mulvey's male gaze theory. With this film, Seidelman crafted a kind of reverse Bechdel test where whenever two male characters get together and have a conversation, they always and only talk about a woman.
Any words from Roberta yet?
The aesthetics of the film also express Seidelman's femme-centric vision, from the warm colors throughout to the graphic matching of the two main characters.
It's a nice explanation. I couldn't do better, so I didn't. And as you heard, it's Roberta Glass is her name. And I just want to read you Seidelman's description of why this is a Jewish movie. It says, Gary and Roberta Glass are a suburban, upwardly mobile Jewish couple played by Jewish actors Mark Blue and Rosanna Arquette in a script written by a Jewish writer, Leora Parrish, and directed by a Jewish director. I strive for authenticity in the characters I create, and because I'm Jewish and grew up in the suburbs, I knew the world of Roberta and Gary Glass. Roberta could very easily have been me. And so I want to show you another scene from it. This is one of my favorite scenes because this is Gary, who's portrayed as kind of this terrible husband. He's vulnerable when he finally meets Susan. He's kind of vulnerable and awkward, but at first he sort of acts like he knows lots of stuff. And this is a scene where he's with his sister, and they're looking for Susan. His sister is now sleeping with a dentist, a Jewish dentist, played by Stephen Wright. And this whole scene is really listen to the names, but also the whole feminist content that the sister introduces.
What did the police say?
Said that most of these cases turn up in 24 hours.
Oh, did you tell them about the jacket, her wedding ring, and the sunfish?
I told them. They seem to think she's having an affair.
Oh my God, maybe she is.
That's ridiculous. Roberta is not having an affair. She's much too uptight.
That is a horrible thing to say. I suppose you're proud of the way you're running around with Becky Schumann.
I didn't know you knew about Becky. Anyway, we're not running around. We're having a perfectly respectable affair.
Gary, let me ask you something.
What?
Does Roberta have orgasms? I mean, did she have them with you?
Orgasms?
You have heard of them, haven't you? I mean, maybe the reason she left you was because you weren't satisfied.
Leslie, not everybody is obsessed with orgasms. Some people just have them.
Did she?
Well, what? Did Phil Donahue do a show?
Oh, you are really a pig. You know that. At least I know about feelings.
Feelings. I feel.
You're disgusting, Gary. You're just like Daddy. No wonder Roberta left you.
Would you stop saying that?
Larry?
Larry.
That's great. Any word from Roberta yet?
Fast work, Les.
Oh, let's have some chicken.
The chicken is for tomorrow. Larry,
What did the police say?
I can't believe the two of you are eating in the middle of a crisis like this.
We're nervous. What do you want?
Then take a Valium like a normal person.
She has great teeth.
Did you catch that last line there? She has great teeth. Wonderful. In any case, Seidelman went through a period, a kind of dry period, which her movies were flops, though some of them are pretty interesting. Making Mr. Right, which is about a woman who has a chance to make the perfect man based on a man who's not so perfect. And it turns out making the perfect man is, the robot turns out to be better than the real man in the end. Wasn't a success. She-Devil with Roseanne Barr and Meryl Streep, about a not very attractive wife who tries to kill her husband's lover, and several other films. But she had her first child in the 1990s. She decided also to go the TV route. And she ended up working on a number of films as well, a number of series as well. And she has reemerged recently, making some films. And two of them, and this has happened with a number of these people, they're making films now which kind of reflect their age. They're now in their 40s or 50s. And so they're making those kinds of movies about older women. One of her movies, which I kind of liked, it's light, called The Hot Flashes. The Hot Flashes is about a team of middle-aged women basketball players. They aren't basketball players, but they used to be in high school. And the breast cancer clinic is closed in their city because of lack of funding. So they come up with this idea that they're going to play the girls team from the high school, the current girls team, which were the state champions, and kind of recreate their old team and beat them. It's got a lot of famous stars in it. And it's kind of a fun movie, not a great movie. But then she made a movie that her mother wrote, Boynton Beach Club, which is about seniors and about dating after your spouse dies, and what that's like, both from a man's perspective and from a woman's perspective. That is a good film, and there's a lot of Jewish characters in that film. So let me go to the third person who I'm sure most of you know, and that person, of course, is Nora Ephron, one of the most successful of these people. Nora Ephron, everyone thinks immediately is Jewish. But she really didn't like to be considered Jewish and came from, her parents were screenwriters. They were not religious. In fact, they hated religion. So they told me the reason for not sending me to Sunday school or anything was because they didn't believe. Many Jewish friends of my parents, though, however, were Jewish. And she became what she calls a cultural Jew, a delicatessen Jew. But she never thought about being Jewish until she went to Wellesley and all of a sudden discovered that Wellesley paired roommates on the basis of religion. And she had refused to declare a religion. And so they forced her to declare that she was Jewish and then paired her with a Jewish girl. And she says, I finally realized that though I might not think of myself as a Jew, other people thought of me that way. And I had to come to terms with it. But at this point in my life, being Jewish doesn't make the top 5 things I would ever say about myself, and it probably never did. I want to give you a short overview just because her rich career, which spans being a journalist, then a satirist, a humorous columnist, a novelist, writing about her own life, then a screenwriter, and then a director, is rather amazing. It's just a nice tribute when she died in 2012.
Nora Ephron is being remembered today as a talent who accomplished everything she set her mind to. The Oscar-nominated screenwriter and director died yesterday of leukemia at the age of 71. Here's Corinne Winter with a look back at her life.
Considered as one of the most influential female authors and screenwriters to emerge from the 20th century, many argue that Nora Ephron was born to write. The child of well-known screenwriters and playwrights, Ephron certainly had the pedigree to eventually write for the screen, but it wasn't her first career choice. After a brief stint as a White House intern during the Kennedy administration, Ephron landed a reporter job for the New York Post. Her talent with the pen eventually caught the attention of other publications like New York Magazine, Esquire, and the New York Times. But it wasn't long before she began writing scripts, making her first splash in movies in 1983 after penning the Meryl Streep drama Silkwood. I can't quit now. The script earned Ephron an Oscar nomination, but it was a romantic comedy she wrote a few years later that really put the name Nora Ephron on Hollywood's map. Oh, God. When Harry Met Sally, about a man and a woman who explore risks of taking their friendship to the next level, became a huge hit. I'll have what she's having. And Ephron was suddenly high in demand, known for her humor and writing appealing female characters. Over the years, more hits followed. I'm having all of these fantasies about some man I have never even met who lives in Seattle. Like Sleepless in Seattle, which Ephron co-wrote. The film starred Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks as strangers who eventually find each other. It also put Ephron in the director's chair.
I did not.
You did too? And You've Got Mail, which brought Ryan and Hanks together again in a romantic setting. Though she had a knack for making romance work on the screen, Ephron struggled with her personal life early in her career. In 1976, she married famous journalist Carl Bernstein and had 2 children. Their marriage ended in a messy divorce 4 years later and became fodder for tabloids. She would later write a book, Heartburn, that described her rocky marriage with Bernstein. Ephron adapted the novel into a screenplay, of course, which co-starred Streep and Jack Nicholson. But her third marriage was a success. In 1987, she tied the knot with Goodfellas screenwriter Nicholas Pileggi.
How would you like to be on a television show?
She continued to write and direct movies later in her life with Bewitched in 2005 and Julie and Julia 4 years later, which teamed her with Meryl Streep for a third time. In all, Ephron wrote more than a dozen screenplays and directed 8 films. In a 2009 interview, she revealed a secret her parents taught her.
Anything in life could be turned into a story, which is really the first rule of humor. If you understand that, you understand everything there is about making things funny.
Sound advice from a writer who helped make audiences laugh throughout her career. Corinne Winter, CNN, Los Angeles.
Nora Ephron, 71 years old. She will be missed, but what accomplishment.
I think I'd be embarrassed to say how many times I've seen When Harry Met Sally.
I'll have what she's having. Right.
What she's having.
Right.
Impressive woman for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Newsroom continues now. Take it away, Brooke.
I will indeed. Hello to all of you. I'm Brooke Bald.
All right. So you have a nice sort of overview of her life and of her early writing experiences. You know, Silkwood, both those movies were made with Mike Nichols, another Jewish director, Silkwood and Heartburn. But with Heartburn, what's interesting is she has a knack for avoiding Jewish subjects. Heartburn is her autobiographical story. And, you know, both characters have Jewish names, and they have Jewish names in the movie, but that is it. There's almost nothing Jewish except they have Jewish friends in the movie. And by casting Jack Nicholson, I mean, this would have been done by, by Nichols, Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep, there's almost no Jewish associations that you would make. When she finally got to be a director, and they showed a little bit of it in there, she made a movie which is really worth seeing, and you can see, I think it's on Amazon, which is called This Is My Life. This Is My Life was her one Jewish movie, starring Julie Kavner. And you all should know who Julie Kavner is. You all know her as Marge, but I knew her, or many of you might have known her, as Rhoda's sister on the series Rhoda, a very Jewish character, or as the Jewish mother who hovers in the sky over Woody Allen in New York Stories. So she was certainly an actress identified with Jewish roles. And in This Is Your Life, she plays a Jewish comedian, Dottie Angles. And Dottie works as a counter girl at a department store, selling makeup and lipstick, but she really wants to be a stand-up comedian. And in many ways, by the way, this film is really the forerunner to The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, because she wants to be this stand-up. She finally gets her big break. She hires a Jewish agent, Arnold Moss, played by Dan Aykroyd. She becomes very successful. She gets on late-night TV shows. The problem is she has two daughters who are very excited at first that she's having success, and then become very soured on that success because she's not spending any time with them. She's never coming around. And it's very similar in that sense to Mrs. Maisel, who has to make that decision. Does she want to parent her children, or does she want to be on the road? And she chooses for the road. The Julie Kavner character, Dottie, is much more conflicted, and she's much more Jewish. There's a Jewish funeral in there. They inherit their aunt's home, and they go to a Jewish funeral. There's all these comedians who babysit for her, from the comedy clubs, many of whom seem to be coded as Jewish. And I'm going to show you a scene from this film. So let's show the scene from This Is My Life. This is actually the trailer.
What do men really want in a woman? The number one response? Long eyelashes. Shallow dogs.
All her life, Dottie Ingalls wanted to be on stage.
Let us welcome her now, Dottie Ingalls.
Any stage.
Joanne, are you married? Oh, dear, single but with married skin. We all know married skin is the right. Don't laugh.
Thanks for coming in.
You gonna be your agent?
Someday he's going to beg to be my agent. Well,
Until the day she got the break.
I have an agent.
We're all very happy for you.
That changed her life.
Who's your agent?
Arnold Moss. Arnold Moss? He eats paper.
Please welcome Dottie Ingalls.
It's going to be even better in L.A.
Now, comics are cleaning her house.
Hand over your purse.
Stand-ups are babysitting. Even babies are babysitting.
I wanted to stay out here a little longer than I was going to.
And she's about to discover the only thing tougher than being a star
Do you like this? People just come up to you and don't even knock.
is being a mother.
I can't imagine a regular mom. Mom was never a regular mom.
You give kids a choice. Your mother in the next room on the verge of suicide versus your mother in Hawaii in ecstasy. They choose suicide in the next room.
I'll be back in 20 years. Think of it as an adventure, girls.
Don't I ever get a turn? Isn't it ever okay for me to have a life?
I hate you.
We're going to
I have no idea.
From the moment
20th Century Fox presents the directorial debut of Nora Ephron, the writer of When Harry Met Sally.
Oprah, Erica, you're watching. It's time to go to bed now.
This is my life.
I should mention, When Harry Met Sally is typical of this coded Jewish thing. Harry is never identified as Jewish, but it's Billy Crystal. He's, hypochondriac. He's neurotic. He's loud. He's pushy. He has all the qualities that, you could say he's a New Yorker, but he's Jewish. He's a Jewish character. Of course, Meg Ryan is the perfect Gentile foil for him. Though when she was writing it, she said that she had originally intended the Meg Ryan character to be her, and that in many ways, Megan Ryan has many of the qualities that Nora Ephron felt she had. She's very controlling. Remember the ordering of food, wanting everything to be perfect, very optimistic. But it's a movie in which it's clear there's a Jewish character, but it's never named. And that's true in all her movies. Let Me Go, she became really famous with Sleepless in Seattle, and then with You've Got Mail. You've Got Mail, I've read the original script versus what ends up on screen. The original script has 3 Jewish scenes. Tom Hanks' girlfriend is clearly Jewish in the original script. That's eliminated. She has 3 encounters with a rabbi who tries to get her to join her synagogue. That's eliminated. What's left is kind of the cultural icons, the scene in Zabar's. There's another scene at the Sturgeon King restaurant. There's all these sorts of hints. Again, there's also the man who's living with Meg Ryan, whose name is Victor Navasky. Victor Navasky is a famous journalist from The Nation, Jewish journalist, and he's a Jewish character, but that's never spelled out in the movie. She just doesn't do those things in her movies. So she's really one of the great women directors, but from my standpoint, from a Jewish standpoint, probably has the least to offer in this lecture. The last person is the most successful of them all. I hope people know her. Nancy Meyers. People know who Nancy Meyers is? No one knows. Okay, well, you're going to know, because Nancy Meyers is the most successful American Jewish women director and one of the most successful women directors of all time in terms of box office. Nancy Meyers grew up, she's a New Yorker, and she grew up she's born in 1952, or 1949. Not very religious. She did go to Israel to spend time on a kibbutz. She had a journalism degree and then first worked in television. But then she teamed up with Charles Schreier. And Charles Schreier and her, first they were partners and lovers, and then they became partners in writing. And they had this script that nobody wanted to take. And it was the script to Private Benjamin. Goldie Hawn had just founded her own studio, production company. She put a lot of money into it, and it became Private Benjamin. Private Benjamin was a movie that a lot of people, some people said, well, Judy Benjamin, if you remember the premise of the story, she's kind of the Jewish American princess about to get married into a perfect suburban life with all her material needs being fulfilled. And her husband, Albert Brooks, dies on their wedding night after having sex. She's totally distraught. She doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She gets convinced by a very suave army recruiter that she'll have she'll get to travel and wear nice clothes if she joins the army. She believes it. She joins the army. She starts learning what a tougher life is, but she adjusts. She becomes a very good soldier, eventually gets assigned to Shape in Belgium. In between, she meets a French doctor who falls in love with her and wants to marry her. But it turns out he really wants to control her life, and he's not so interested in her having her own career. And she does something which the real Nancy Meyers did in 1972. She had been engaged in 1972, and she walked out of the marriage like a week before. And so in Private Benjamin, that happens where at the wedding, Private Benjamin decides she can't go through it. She's going to become her own woman. Some people say, well, it's the Jewish American princess stereotype. Let me read you what Nancy Meyers says about that. She says, why am I not finding the Nancy Meyers thing here? Here. She says, people like to call Judy Benjamin a Jewish princess, but I take great offense to that expression. It's racist and sexist, just because a girl gets a nose job or shops or wants to be taken care of. But Judy is a woman of her time with the problems of her time. Because of social conventions, she was following a road that wasn't right for her. And the army allows her to grow and figure out what she wants to do with her life. And she won an Oscar nomination. This is her first screenplay, and won the award for the best screenplay from the Writers Guild during that year with her husband. They started, basically churning out the hints. And Baby Boom with Diane Keaton about being a single mother, and in that case, being a mother to a distant relative's child, balancing career and child rearing, nominated for a Golden Globe, Irreconcilable Differences, Father of the Bride, and finally she got to make her own movie in 1998, a remake of The Parent Trap. I'm not going to talk that much about that. I'm going to talk about her most successful movie, which was What Women Want. And people immediately go, ooh, she made that because it has Mel Gibson as the lead. But think of the story. Mel Gibson is this very male chauvinist, exploitative man who one day falls in the bathtub and then has this experience where he can read women's minds. And initially he does this to exploit his women workers, take advantage of women to get them to bed. But eventually he learns to be more empathic towards women, to be a better man. And in the end, the last scene, it looks like he's going to hook up with a woman who at first he was exploiting and taking advantage of by stealing her ideas. And so it is a feminist movie, and it established her as writing the romantic comedies as well, not unlike Nora Ephron. This was a field women were supposed to go in and be good at. And Nancy Meyers did this. But then Nancy Meyers did what you saw in Susan Seidelman, making movies about older women. And her movies about older women, not real old, 40s or 50s, but she got divorced at the age of 50. It was a great shock for her. She's very successful, but she had been with Charles Schreier for almost 20 years. And she makes a series of movies which are largely about it. It's complicated and something's got to give. And again, people say, where's the Jewishness in this? And it's very, very subtle, but it's there. Believe it or not, in Something's Gotta Give, Diane Keaton is Jewish. Her name is Erica Berry. And she throws around Yiddish words a couple of times in the film, and I'm going to show you a clip of one of them. But the film is basically about how older men only like younger women. They don't think older women have much to offer, even though they're professionally more interesting and more accomplished. And Jack Nicholson is dating her daughter. And he has a heart attack at her house. And she has to take care of him. And his brush with mortality makes him open up to her. And he realizes that this is really an interesting person. I have much more in common with her than I do with the 30-year-old. She also, by the way, the Diane Keaton character, also is attracted to a younger man, Keanu Reeves. But let me show you a scene early on, which kind of sets this out. And the one thing in here is look at what she says about Diane Sawyer. And that's the tip-off. That's the Jewish moment in this film.
With me.
Never been married, Harry.
No, I haven't.
Wow. Now, why do you think that is?
Well, some people just don't fit the mold. So far, yeah.
Hey, if it ain't broke.
Exactly.
Wait a second. Aren't you like a famous bachelor?
Oh, I wouldn't say I'm famous.
Yeah, didn't I read an article about you in New York Magazine?
I guess some people find it interesting that I've escaped the noose for so long.
That was the title of the article, The Escape Artist. I read that article. That was you? Well, you were once engaged to someone really big. Who was it? Joan Collins? No. No. Wait a minute. Okay, Carly Simon? Yeah, somebody cool like that. Somebody like that. Not Martha Stewart. No, not Martha Stewart. No. You could just ask him.
No, this is more fun. It's like I'm not here.
Harry was once engaged to Diane Sawyer.
Right. Diane Sawyer. I love her. I'm impressed.
Yeah, women your age love that about me. You know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
It's not a bad thing to say, women your age.
Oh, no, I'm sure it was a compliment.
It's just an accurate observation. It's
So when was this? The engagement?
a long time ago. She was this adorable, lanky girl from Kentucky with the greatest pair of legs I have ever seen. Never understood her ending up on a job where she never showed them.
You can't be serious. She's Diane Sawyer. She goes into caves in Afghanistan with a schmata on her head. Who cares about her legs?
It's a great, goes into caves in Afghanistan with a schmata on her head. Beautiful little line. There are other little moments like that in Nancy Meyers films as well. I want to show you just a very brief clip. It's kind of a sweet scene. She made a Christmas movie called The Holiday with Cameron Diaz and Kate Winslet. And they're women who exchange homes. They're both coming off bad relations. Kate lives in England and Cameron Diaz lives in LA, and they switch homes. And Kate Winslet is now meets a young composer, Hollywood composer, and an older Jewish man who lives in the neighborhood who used to work in Hollywood. And she invites him over to her house because he's lonely and she feels badly for him. And Jack Black, who plays the young man who's interested in her, she doesn't know that yet, comes over to her house. And this is a scene, remember, this is a Christmas movie. This is the scene that takes place.
Hi.
Hello. Bad timing?
No. Come in.
How's it going?
Good. Everything's good.
This FedEx was laying on the gate from a little town called London, England.
Oh, a friend of mine's writing a book, and I give him notes sometimes.
You have company?
I'm having a little Hanukkah party.
What, did you join a temple since I last saw you?
My neighbor knew I didn't know anyone here, so he wanted to introduce me to some of his friends, and somehow it turned into a Hanukkah thing. Do you want to come in for a sec?
All right, yeah. I could play spin the dreidel. Sounds good. I just have to say, this is one of the best Hanukkahs I've ever had.
I've had too much of the Manischewitz. I'm gonna have to be cut off. Oh, cutting you. I take this very seriously, but I'm telling you the truth.
Don't listen to that. They're nuts.
Okay, so you're telling me you were not a ladies' man?
Never. I married very young.
Yes, only because you had the greatest girl in town. You had to marry her to take her off the market.
That's the truth.
Everyone loved Marion.
Greatest laugh. What did he say? She had the greatest ass.
It's a lovely little moment, and she does. They're in her latest movie, The Intern, with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, where he plays an older man, retired man who's widowed, and he becomes an intern at the company of this young woman who's very dynamic, runs an e-commerce business. She doesn't really want him there, but she learns that he knows a lot more about business and life, and he helps repair her marriage. But again, there's a scene there. It may be the Robert De Niro character is Jewish. He goes to a Jewish funeral. He seems to be very familiar with what's going on. And it's kind of, again, a key little scene. It's not, doesn't change the plot, but it's a Jewish moment. What I'm going to do, I think now, is end, just because I've run over a little, I think. We started late, though, I think, too. But I just want to draw attention to one other person, though there's a whole number of other women I could have talked about. The other most successful person, and that's Mimi Leader. And Mimi Leader is different in that these other women are working in genres that women traditionally work in. Romantic comedy or comedies, or the teenage movie, coming of age movie. But the movies that Mimi Leader makes are different. She got her start in television. She's the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, an Auschwitz survivor, and got her beginnings on LA Law and Hill Street Blues. And she came to the attention of Steven Spielberg when he was just forming his studio. And he hired her to do action adventure movies because that's where the money is. If you want to make big bucks, you make blockbusters, action adventure movies, or you make the big cartoons. And women were totally shut out of that field. It's not so true anymore with Wonder Woman and a number of other movies. But when Mimi Leader started making movies in the late 1990s, there were almost no women making, and she made her first two movies for Spielberg are action adventure movies and sci-fi movies, The Peacemaker and Deep Impact. She went on to make more what would be called women's movies. Pay It Forward was her movie. And then she went on to a whole series of television movies and television series, including one that if you've never seen and you're looking for something to stream, go to HBO and watch The Leftovers. Anybody know The Leftovers? An amazing series. It's about 2% of the world's population disappears one day for no reason. And everyone's left wondering, how do you mourn? You don't even know where these people are. And it's initially was supposed to be about 9/11 and the trauma of 9/11. But it's really, it's as much about the trauma of the Holocaust. And I don't want to give you a spoiler, but when you get to the last season, there's a whole show dedicated to Judaism and the meaning of, if God is all powerful, then why is there evil in the world? Why do these things happen? And it's a remarkable, remarkable episode. It's one of Mimi Leader's episodes. So definitely worth seeing. So next time I'm going to talk about women who are the third generation, who are very different. They're very self-consciously Jewish in their movies. They're very transgressive in their attitudes. These are third generation and fourth generation feminists who have a very different sexual ethos, a different ethos towards bodies, towards what's appropriate behavior for women. Jill Soloway, probably the most famous for Transparent, as a comedian who's gotten involved, Amy Schumer. But there's a whole bunch of these women who are all Jewish and who make these really movies that are in your face about Jewish characters. And so that's what I'm going to talk about next time. But let's open it up to discussion.
I just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Barron for a really wonderful lecture, wonderful presentation. And I'm so excited that we got to be, I guess, the first ones that you gave the talk to. So that is incredibly exciting. Thank you for sharing that with us. So just in the interest of time, we do have a little bit of time for questions, for a few. And as I discussed at the beginning of the program, a couple ways we can do that. You can either include your question in the chat, which again is available at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar, or you can raise your hand, as I saw some of you were doing earlier. You click the participants button again in your toolbar, which brings up a little blue hand icon, which you can click, and I will unmute you. So if there are any questions for Dr. Barron, I welcome them now. And I'll give people also a minute if you need to think, or if you're busy typing, that's totally fine too. Okay. And just to let everyone know, we will make the recording of this lecture available to everyone this week. So you can find that. We will be emailing that out.
No questions.
Not seeing any now, but
by the way, there are a lot more of these women directors. I've been compiling a directory of them, and I've got about 100 names. So it really, Jewish women have really played an important role in the industry since the 1980s as directors. And my categorizations are maybe a little simplistic. I'm just trying to figure out how to classify them, and I'm doing it by generations. These women that we looked at today were largely born after World War II, as opposed to most of the women I talked about before who were born either during or before World War II, and had just a very different view of their connections to Jewishness.
So we do have one question, and they are asking, is Nancy Meyers working on anything currently?
I think she is. I saw something, if you want to go to the Internet Movie Database, it listed her for doing something that looked like it was a video. She hasn't made a lot of movies. She's very slow, and partly she gets top-notch talent, who she pays a lot. And if you noticed in the backdrop, she's known because of her films are very white, suburban, fancy houses, beautiful scenery. Think of the house in It's Complicated, for example, or the one, Diane Keaton's one, and Something's Gotta Give. And she attributes this to her mother, who was an interior decorator. But there's rarely black characters in her movies. It's really very white, upper class, suburban characters. But I think she is making some.
Sorry, so sorry. Another question was from Barbara. Where do you see women directors going with the age of blockbusters now?
Well, where they've gone is largely into cable and into streaming services. You do have a number of women who are making big blockbusters. Wonder Woman being the most obvious of them, but starting in the 1980s, 1990s, Mimi Leder's the first, but then The Matrix was made by two women. You have a whole series of films, and you have big cartoons that are also animators that are making films, and so you have that set of people who work in sort of bigger films, and then you have the independent filmmakers who are making smaller films that often very good films, but they have a place to go now. It used to, between the proliferation of film festivals and the demands of streaming networks, which don't operate on a traditional profit system. They operate on, you're paying a premium to be a member. It doesn't matter what you watch. And they're willing to take, if you look at how many movies Netflix makes and supports, and these movies are getting nominated for Academy Awards now. And there's a big to-do in Hollywood that's not fair. You shouldn't have TV movies mixed up with Hollywood movies. But that's where a lot of these women are going. So, like I said, 30% of the directors in television are women, whereas it's about 17% for Hollywood feature films. So they've got better opportunities there, and that's where they've gravitated.
Dr. Barron, I had seen Fast Times countless times in my life, but it wasn't until tonight that I ever thought of the Ratner character, as Jewish. Just a coming of age comedy, so I might have been lost in that and remained in the same place I was when I first saw it.
I don't think she think she tries to make it obvious. It's just something, that's who he is. He's Mark Ratner. You saw his looks. You saw how he portrayed himself. He's kind of the nerdy Jewish guy. And that's who gets the girl in the end. The last thing is, Stacy and him have become good friends, but they haven't gone all the way yet. And they make that point. And it's a point that's also made. I didn't mention this about Nora Ephron. One of the hallmarks of Nora Ephron's movies is she never has sex scenes. She believes that romantic comedies died when you started having more graphic sex scenes, that people didn't need to talk and have banter and repartee and flirt. And so she never has sex scenes in her movies. And if you think of the two great ones, Sleepless in Seattle and Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, in one, they don't meet until the last scene in Sleepless in Seattle. And in the other one, their relationship is really online. They hate each other in person because they don't know who each other is. But they're the person they're talking online. It isn't until the last scene that they have any chemistry with each other. And that's kind of a hallmark. And she makes it a point that she didn't want sex in her role. And she's credited with kind of rebirthing the romantic comedy as a popular genre.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to just say another heartfelt thank you to Dr. Barron. We hope that you will all join us next month, July 9th. Thursday, July 9th will be the third and final installment of Dr. Barron's lecture series. Please note that that lecture will begin at 6 p.m., not 7:30. So that one's going to be starting a little bit earlier. But again, we will send all of that information out in the email that includes the link to this lecture. But just wanted to let you all know. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. We are so glad that you were all able to join us tonight for a really awesome lecture, and hope you all stay safe, stay healthy, and be well.
And I should let you know it's a raunchy lecture. The last one is very raunchy, so.
Good to know. So we're all excited. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.